So since we are on a sort of tight time frame today, thank you all for joining first and foremost. Today's presentation, we're going to be talking about structuring and managing performance for virtual teams. My name is Travis White. I'm the Director of Enterprise Sales at Degreed, and I'm super excited to have Doug Gray, Dr. Doug Gray, joining. He's the CEO of Action Learning Associates. Many of you may know him. Just by way of quick housekeeping, this call is being recorded and we will share the link back with you all. Everyone has been muted now, so if you've got a question, feel free to come off mute, but we encourage you to put those questions in the chat. I know a lot of you are putting, where your company, what company you're with, where you're based. That's great. If you've got questions throughout, though, Doug and I will be monitoring this and address those, but we are on sort of a tight time frame. We're intentionally trying to leave time at the end for Q&A, so the more questions you have, the better. But once again, thanks everyone for joining.
So let's get started by talking about where the heck virtual teams are and what the heck they are. If you had a spiky view of virtual teams, you know, just as this chat is reflecting, that we've got people all over the world right now synchronously meeting. And our virtual teams are distributed by social economic status, the SES idea. And as you know, they're accessible from any platform or device. And what they do is help us focus on whatever's known resources or business needs, but they also connect people in social isolation. For instance, last night I had a Zoom call with my parents who are in assisted living in Minnesota, and my dad is so impressed that he bought a new web camera. I think the point is urgent responses demand that all of us connect. You've maybe seen that Hand of God image. Was that Michelangelo or Da Vinci? Where the notion is that we're touching each other right now synchronously. We're all physically dispersed, but we're using some kind of digital connectivity process or software. Happens to be Zoom, which I'm told on Monday crashed the American educational systems in a whole bunch of schools, in part because of the increased use. We're using a shared task. We're focusing on an outcome in this example in a very short mini webinar. And we're using some kind of groupware, hardware, or computer mediated communication, a CMC. There's this notion out there, and I want to assure you this is not science fiction, though it might seem like it might feel like it, which is that we're using more and more software, we're using technology more than we ever have in the past. And that as the human intellect, that kind of gold line, progresses, there's a machine intelligence which is perhaps obvious to anybody born after a certain time frame. We're dependent on tools. This is a tool, right? We use pens. This is a tool. We use it often. And I'm told that there's more technology in this today than there was when we landed a man on the moon. So what does this mean? We're more and more dependent on technology in ways that we might never have thought. And that's a notion called the singularity. There could become a time when all those artificial body parts in Doug that keep Doug healthy and active, from cataracts to an artificial heart, will also inform us about how to make smart decisions. Well, there's nothing new here. A friend of mine from Quebec says that Americans talk about sports example and military examples. So here's my military example. Telemedicine has been around for 50 years, at least. And if you think about soldiers in a battleground environment, they've been using remote technology to make business decisions based on limited intelligence at that time in that battlefield. Well, the same thing is accelerating. Yesterday, for instance, I was with a physician who texted his buddy to get the information that his practice leaders could not provide to him. We've been using texts, we've been using images as long as we've had texts and images. So there's nothing new. What is new is our trust in that and the access to that information. So academics use 2x2 models to explain just about everything. So here's my 2x2 model of the day. If you were to think about formal systems on the top and informal systems on the bottom, and if you were to think about asynchronous, which just means at different times, or synchronous at the same time, you end up with a 2x2 model. We're in the upper left right now. It's a webinar, a podcast, but it's being recorded so it can be distributed at a later time. And all four of these are different ways that we think about technology. So for those of you who are managing technology, I'd invite you to ask, what does my team need now? Does my team need formal or informal? Do they need asynchronous, happens at any time, like a book off the bookshelf you pull off, or synchronous. And that leads us to this thing called degreed. What the heck's degreed, Travis?
Yeah, so we get this question a lot, and I don't want this to be an advertisement for Degree, but all of the things that Doug just talked about, we handle and we can support depending on the way that you're trying to address your virtual teams and your employees or associates in general. So I do get the award for the busiest slide that you're going to see today. But hopefully, when I describe this in a minute, it will become the concept is super simple, right? So you'll see the Degree logo, the eyeglasses in the center. And the way I like to describe this that I feel like makes sense to a lot of people and the way our technology works is that we become the front door to your entire learning, development, and talent ecosystems. So all of the black bubbles that you see at the top, your learning systems, if you've got an LMS system, a virtual training system, your business learning content, whether that's a third party or you may have subscriptions to MOOCs or professional journals, all of the public learning, all the learning that each of us on this call do every day in the flow of work learning, where we just get on and read articles, we go to YouTube and watch videos, things in our specific learning style, all of those can be accessed through Degree. So we are super open and we can connect to all of your formal and informal systems. On each side, the supply and demand, the yellow and sort of the salmon peachy color, whether it's your HCM systems, whether it's your formal talent systems and skills assessments, all of that data can be brought in too. And then all the blue things at the bottom, your applicant tracking systems, your jobs, career tools, enabling career mobility, all of those can be brought in as well. So depending on what your employee is looking to do, we can meet them where they're at. And the way that this probably will make a lot of sense to you is if you've got Amazon or if you've got Netflix, those sort of one-to-one, everyone on this call has different, if you've purchased from Amazon or if you've watched a movie or a television show on Netflix, we all are going to have different suggestions based on that. So we're all going to have individual experiences. That's what Degree brings to the table. And what we've seen during especially this pandemic is we've grown exponentially because organizations are looking for a modernized way to approach that. So that's why I wanted to put this slide in just to color in a little context and give you guys some perspective on how Degree is helping from a technology standpoint with virtual teams.
And I want to apologize for the operator error. I couldn't find my cursor, so I pushed the wrong button.
You're good, Doug.
And to me, Degreed fits because it's an example of an informal learning platform that mirrors how teams are evolving. So the image on the far left is top down, that hierarchical model. C, D, and E report to A and B supports A. Well, that's how we were all raised. When you think about whatever age you are, top-down hierarchical models, they're prevalent from our teachers to our parents to our managerial designs. They're not going to disappear, those models. In fact, they need to exist in many businesses. However, they're not the only model. So the middle model is a network organizational model. Think of it as a spider web or a snowflake or a virus. This is how things really are today. And we know this. So person C is central to that organizational map. They're pivotal in decision-making perhaps, and they maybe have the funds to authorize some investment in a certain direction. In contrast, person F is not as important. They're marginalized and they're only used for a couple people, person C and person E. But what does this mean? If you took that structure, that little organizational map of say 6 or 8 people, and then looked at a bigger company, it's messy. And it's commonly messy in ways that we don't think we can understand. And that's a limiting belief. At IBM, for instance, they plot all of these in network organizational models, and they'll ask person C to ask all these other people to provide a performance review for them. Why? Because those are the 10 people who know that person best. So person C's manager, let's say it's person A, is not the only one providing feedback. Well, that's how we work, isn't it? If you think about your social media connections, or you think about who you've reached out to in the last 24 hours, they're all the people you like and trust. Well, organizationally, that means you've got a bunch of these bubbles that represent the shared values, transparent goals, how you exchange information, and how you reward people. So I think it's important to note that KPIs exist on the far left. A different model, objectives and key results, exists on the far right. And that's where we're headed. So when I think about my cursor, You could have an organizational map that looks like any of these on the left. And if you look closely, the Microsoft one has, guns, and people are not as supportive. They're all organizational maps. They're ways to think of your network. So I invite you, we're going to pause for 30 seconds to do something really technologically advanced. Take a piece of paper, take a pen, and write down your name in the middle of your snowflake. And if you can, define 6 or 8 bubbles around you. These are the 6 or 8 people that you might call or go to if you needed information. Or they could be the 6 or 8 people you'd go to in the middle of the night, say at 2 a.m. When I've done this with audiences, they can't do it. They can't come up with 3 or 4 people. You can. So make this a task, please. Create your organizational network map for yourself at work, because that's the theme of the day. We're creating structures that augment virtual leadership. And if you don't have 6 or 8, I assure you, you are normal. And my invitation or my nudge or push or whatever the heck it is to come up with 6 or 8. And it could be that guy I met last week on that Zoom call. And in time, you'll fill out more details. Why do I think this is so important? The biggest problem in our culture today is not cardiovascular disease and sedentary lifestyles. It's social isolation. You and I, Travis, are connected occasionally, and we see each other and you nod your head like we're good friends. I need that at a neurobiological level, and so do you. Social isolation leads to all kinds of other problems in the workplace and at home. And that's the reason why I strongly want everybody to create your little map. When you do so, send it to me. I want to see it. Travis?
So what you're saying, Doug, is I can call you in the middle of the night and you
Yeah,
won't
man.
get angry with me?
And I'll filter your phone
Is
because
that
I
good?
use another technology tool.
I do think of Doug as someone that I could call in the middle of the night, although I promise you I will not unless it is a super big emergency,
There
Doug.
you go. And I'll be right over.
So I wanted to include a client example because, as I mentioned earlier, during this pandemic especially, we've just seen a flood of different stories about how people have grown and adapted. And this particular story is captured on our website. I would encourage you all to go out to our blog.degreed.com and take a look, and I can send you that information later. Don't feel like you've got to jot it down right now, but there's a number of case studies and interviews. And this particular story comes from an interview that's captured on our website. It's Nicola Braden at Unilever. And they did an interview just asking how they're navigating the new normal and things that are really jumping out. And I thought this was applicable here, especially as we think about the way that we're managing virtual teams and making sure that we're having that connection that Doug talked about. So one of the problems that really jumped out in this interview was, for me, was that there's just too many variables right now. Like we don't, depending on where you're at, you can be overwhelmed by, is school in today for these kids? Do we have to wear a mask to go into this store? What does normal look like in your potential section of the world, right? And there's just a lot of variables. And even beyond just those variables within our work, do I go into the office? Do I stay? If I do go into the office, what does that look like? So they called out that there's so many variables and they don't like to constantly be in react mode because it just feels that reactionary mode is such an insecure place to be, right? So they focus at Unilever on working on much shorter time frames. And I love her quote, it's staying very, very connected to the rest of the business. So what that means is that instead of thinking about managing and putting together performance reviews and plans for your people that are 6, 12, 18 months out in the future, maybe with a lot of things we should think a lot shorter time frames. Maybe we're looking at days, weeks, even hours, right? But the thing that's sort of their guiding principle here, their North Star, is what does the business really need right now? And I think that's it's really important to consider those incremental wins because it keeps the teams focused, it keeps them connected. And I know it's super overused, but everyone is pivoting, right? We're always pivoting during this pandemic and the way that this new normal works. Just thinking in those shorter chunks and shorter timeframes, I think does bring a lot of clarity and purpose in the day-to-day work.
And psychologists talk about it as internal locus of control. If I can manage today, then I can manage this week. in contrast to being overwhelmed by all those external factors. So how do we measure this? We've been talking generally about structuring and managing performance. You all probably are familiar with team engagement scores. As an example, the Net Promoter Score. To what extent would you refer this business or this organization to your friends and family? One of our kids works at a Fortune 7 company, and every time she logs in, it asks a pulse question. And it's not goofy like, how excited are you about going to work today? It's often a little bit deeper, like to what extent do you trust your leaders in your organization? Leadership trust is an index. And the point is that when our workers are tapped in this way to ask some of these deeper questions, it provokes them to design the structures that are needed every time they log in. So now there's emotional sentiment for employees at that company. Our other daughter works at another company that's also a Fortune 500, and they'll ask questions like this one: are the current information distribution processes meeting your needs? The point isn't what's the question. The point is to use feedback loops, and I think that's where we're at. The goal of this mini survey is to increase that score over time. Also, that's why you and I get all those customer sentiment questions after you purchase anything now online. It doesn't matter whether it's Amazon or your business. So what does it mean? We need to design better feedback loops. Psychologists talk about feedback all the time, and figure out whatever best practices are going to serve your organization. These are structures. In fact, they're more efficient and effective than ever in human history. The feedback loops you're using now are better than anything we've ever had. They're also slower than anything we've ever have in the future. Think about that for a second. You might be overwhelmed by your inbox and all those interruptive ads, but it's only going to increase as your sentiment becomes better known to artificial intelligence and logarithmic tools. Your buying habits are a known thing. Your digital profile already exists. Google knows it very well, and it'll pull up sentiments that complete the rest of your search faster than ever. Well, the same thing's happening with data storage. And it is just a regular process. It's a status update. It enables us to have transparent access to information. Some of you might be in worlds that use points and badges and levels. This is called gamification, so that you demonstrate what's called scope to mastery faster than the next person. And if you do demonstrate scope to mastery, you will be promoted faster. I heard a story yesterday about a new hire who mastered those skills so fast that she qualified for a spot bonus of 5K. So for a kid who's maybe 25 years old, that's a big number. And the point is that we can demonstrate these best practices in small ways that can be cascaded throughout an organization. A goofy example, maybe for some of you, is a 3-minute scavenger hunt. So let's imagine that somebody sends a few questions out, and Degreed is pretty good at this because it's an informal search system. And if one who comes up with the fastest answer that's accurate gets a public recognition, not necessarily a cash reward. In fact, quiz question, Travis, what's a bigger motivator for human behavior? Is it cash or is it public recognition?
Public recognition.
You've been well coached, man. It is, in fact. So here we are. We'll try to address your questions in the chat if I can push the right buttons.
Yeah, and one of the things, Doug, great job. We had talked about trying to keep our portion of this, the formalized portion of going through some slides around 20 minutes, because I feel like we all get Zoom fatigue, but we also need this kind of connection where we're learning and we're thinking through ways to improve our situations. So when we came up with this idea, we came up with the idea of a micro webinar where it's 30 minutes or less. So super happy that we kept it to 20 minutes for our portion, but we would love feedback from you. If you feel like this was helpful, if you've got suggestions on ways to improve. So far, Doug and I have come up with this idea of leading virtual teams, and we've got 3 sessions, and we'll share some information about the future 2 sessions in just a moment. But in addition to that, anything that you would like to, if you would like more information about Action Learning Associates or Degreed and what the heck we do and how we've helped other organizations, we're happy to share that with you. Feel free to take a screenshot of this. We will follow up with our information and this recording afterwards. But if you just want information, Doug and I can send that. If you can't tell, we're pretty informal guys. But if you want to have a more deeper conversation around your specific situation, how we might be able to help, we're super happy to accommodate that.
So I just unmuted everybody, which could be overwhelming. But if you've got a question, I think you can just ask it.
Yep, I just checked the chat and I don't have any questions there, but we would love to field some questions.
So Craig and Eric and Jennifer, as former clients, I know that you're not bashful. And if anybody out there is using any form of structure for virtual leadership, we'd love to hear that story. Eric.
So repeat the second part of the question. Are we using a formal, what kind of structure?
How are you using virtual structures to organize the folks at your company, Biotage?
That's a good question. I mean, I think we have teams set up now, and there's quite a bit of individual weekly structure. So there's daily calls, weekly calls. So I'm not sure what the best direction to go with that is, but I know Lars, for example, Lars Lindstrom, who's on the call, might be able to give you an example of what he does with his team. I think they have a regular cadence. Is that right, Lars? Hello?
Lars, I think you're muted. So
sorry about that. Yes, we do have recurring calls. We have sales calls, of course, with the whole team, but also individual calls on a weekly basis. We also have training with the team in these calls. So we try to keep it on a regular basis, and also, as you do here, fairly informal, to give more of a personal touch to kind of regain some of that lack of social interactions. Also to keep in mind, I mean, half of my team was actually home-based to start with, so we did have some experiences going into the situation with COVID.
Lars, do you design formal times and also informal times, like virtual conversations, meals?
Yes, I mean, we have a structure where I do one-on-one calls with everybody in my team on a bi-weekly basis, and the very clear objective of those calls is that we should have interactions between those calls. So when we can get to the formal one-on-one, we don't really have anything to discuss, just so we create more of a natural flow rather than bottling everything up for the one-on-one call. So the shorter the one-on-one call is, the formal call is, the more successful I've been, I would say, in interaction in a more natural and in a formal way with my team.
So maybe you can answer Alan's question that's in the chat here. What happens when you have a talent shortage? And this is a great question, Alan, thanks. And the virtual teams end up being the same people constantly shifting from project A to project B. My thought is we need to shift the teams. That organizational network cluster needs to become a different cluster in response to that new thing. Another approach that I often use is to poke people, like I'm doing with Eric and with you right now, so that people increase engagement and they become more involved. What other thoughts, Lars? What else do you do?
What I always do for the sales calls is that it's not just me droning on for like an hour with information. I always make sure that at least 60 to 80% of the time is actually somebody else doing a presentation or give an example. So I'm kind of forcing people into the spotlight, and it's been working really well. I also invite people from other departments. This Friday, for example, we have an individual from the other department presenting one of their products that might be of interest to my team. So it's crucial that my time speaking is limited, and that I make sure that everybody has their 50 minutes of fame, so to speak.
I love that. And I don't know how you came up with the 60 to 80, but I think it's a tremendous percentage. Keep it up. We're trying to model that right now, aren't we? With 2 presenters, keep it short, invite others to engage in the conversation.
I think another thing to Alan's question that comes up consistently, especially here at Degree, is modeling empathy and what that looks like. Because when you've got that same person that you're tapping over and over again because of a talent shortage, you need to show some grace, right? And understand where they're coming from and how overwhelming that can be at times. I know in our software platform, we're able to integrate skills. So hopefully over time, you can grow that network of people and better understand where those skills exist. But in the meantime, it's all about empathy, right? It's
You
understanding.
guys do a better job than others, I'm told, of not only tracking who's learning this, and this, but don't they get measures somehow so that informal learning can become a thing?
Yeah, it's in terms of our platform, a lot of algorithms are built in to pull those skills in so you can better model what they're getting, right? So the suggestions and things, much like, the Amazon or Netflix examples, based on their habits, those things feed that algorithm, and that certainly helps from what they're developing.
Gotcha. So we're going to wrap up in a couple minutes. Here are the other dates for the other little sessions. If there are things that you would like for us to discuss, please email us or reach out. And
excuse me, can I just add one more thing? Sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt you. I think you're touching on really just before here. I think the empathy and the atmosphere and the team is much more crucial today when you have the virtual meetings where people are comfortable in asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something that sometimes is forgotten, is when questions are seen as why did you not know this? Instead of looking at why did this question come up and understand what is the root of the question rather than just brushing it off as you should have known this beforehand. Creating that atmosphere of people being comfortable and reaching out and raising their hand, I think is the first step you need to take. If you don't have that in place, you're not going to get the interaction.
Encouraging curiosity.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of research into that, empathy and curiosity. I use, I'll give you a website, VIA, character.org has a free assessment. And for those who are in transition, it might be a way to articulate your strengths. It might be familiar to you, but it might be unfamiliar. And the VIA looks at the top 24 signature strengths that we all have. So anybody who's ever received an email from me will see my top 5 signature strengths, not because you need to know them, but because I'm modeling that this is a little bit more about me. So for you, Karen, if curiosity is one of the things that you want others to know about you or you want in your team, celebrate it, please. Use that language, please, in some way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was going to say, as far as the skills shortage, one of the things that we've really, we just did some roundtables with our leaders talking about delegation for developing others so that we can have transfer of skills, and teaching others so that we can, build that talent pool. So I was just going to.
Good for you. You probably know this, but delegation is the weakest skill of most managers.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a negative or pejorative kind of a way. It's just a thing. So if you're a manager, your job is to maximize the productivity of others. You're supposed to be good at this, but nobody's ever taught you how to do it well. I think that's what virtual leadership enables us to do. Let's imagine you've got a task list and you give it to somebody and they knock out 20, 40, 60, or 80% of it. That tells you everything you need to know. You're smiling. What are you thinking, Karen?
I just, I almost wanted to just change their vocabulary from delegation to development and make it a,
Perfect. On that good note, any other comments? May we all develop today, huh?
Happy Wednesday, everyone.
All right, we'll send a link out and invite you to reach out and share this with others if it's useful. Hope to see you next week. Notice it's a different time of day so that we can try to hook other people.
thank you.
Hey,
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.